So this week, Amy and I want to talk about a topic that we really struggle with. And I feel like you and I are pretty honest about the issues that we struggle with. And what we want to talk about is delegating in the role of a leader. And it can be really difficult to do sometimes, because especially when you come from where we came from, where we were like the workhorses. And so we weren't used to being in a role where we had to delegate. So we had our role, we knew what we had to do. We went to work, we did it, and we went home. And now we wear so many different hats, and we have to figure out what we can do ourselves and what we can delegate really to Dawn,
Mhm.
which can be really, really difficult. I said to Amy, I've been finding that like I'm having trouble capturing where I'm spending my time, because like I have a plan and then it goes sideways and I end up doing like 10 other things. And some of those things could be things that I could really send to Dawn, right?
Right.
So wouldn't you agree that this is an area that we've kind of been struggling with?
It is. It's something that I think we can see the real difference is when we became business owners to when we weren't business owners. Because for me personally, I know that I struggle with this because I did not estimate the amount of time that it would take me to do not only the administrative, like back office things, but in bringing on new business and strategically talking to new clients, that takes time. It's not like a quick 5-minute conversation, at least not in the line of work that Laura and I are doing. So when it comes to transactional matters or it comes to disputes among, business owners that we're representing, perhaps one business owner against another one, there's a really full picture that we need to capture. So when Laura and I are doing client intake for new clients, that's time that we have to account for. And we are really good about time, like capturing our time and our time management software, but not everything can be built out. Some of it is absorbed in the fact that, you're bringing on a new client, or even if it's like for training purposes for your employees or for new team members, there's time that's going to be eaten up from that, block that you might have that you might not have accounted for because that's not what you were used to doing. So for me, at least as of late, I have just felt a little frenetic going from task to task. Whereas I used to be like Laura, where I was very regimented, like, okay, I know I'm working on this motion. It's probably going to take me about 3 hours, going to break for a lunch break. Then I'm going to do X, then I'm going to do Y, then I'll do Z, and then my day will be over with. Now I work on A, I get a phone call from Q, I get,
Yes.
something else popping up in item J, and it's like you're all over the alphabet at that point. Nothing feels very like sequential. There's less predictability. I think that's a fair thing to
That is
say,
so accurate.
right?
Our days used to, I'm sorry to cut you off, but that was
No,
like
it's okay.
so accurate. Our days used to be like we would get to the office. We could literally, it was like clockwork. Get to the
Clockwork.
office, have our cup of coffee, have our morning chat, and then do our work until
Mhm.
lunch, take a break for
Mhm.
lunch, come back from lunch, bill more hours, and go home.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah, it was very predictable. Um, and look, this is the choice that we've made,
Of course.
but this is a challenge that I don't think we could predict, to use the word, that we could really predict or fully appreciate until you're actually in the thick of it. And, like Laura introed this podcast episode saying that we are very honest about the journey that we're on. And we also think that these podcasts and these episodes, they not only help us, but we know that they're going to help somebody else who's feeling like this and they just can't put their finger on it. And you should have seen us when we were prepping for this episode, because we're sitting there and we're like, oh, aha, there's the light bulb moment. Like, we started with one idea of what we were going to talk about. And as we were preparing for it, we're like, oh, I think this is kind of a delegation issue. Really, it's
Yeah.
masked by something else, but the root cause of it is the way that we're delegating. So I'll give you an example. We do a lot of transactional work, whether it be, business transactions and, sale of businesses, purchase of businesses, formations of new companies, etc. We also do real estate transactional work. So I find that I have to be in my business transactions much more than I have to be in my real estate transactions on a day-to-day basis. Something like our real estate transactions where our paralegal, who's extremely competent and very knowledgeable in that area, she can be in them and she can far exceed our expectations as to how she can manage those transactions for us. And my problem is that I'm trying to translate the amount of involvement I have in one area into another practice area that doesn't require me to be doing as much or be in it as much. And I find myself getting into this like mental trap of, oh, I should be doing this, or oh, I don't want to give this to Dawn again because I know she's got X, Y, and Z to do today. But she's like, no, guys, just give me that work. It's okay. That's what I'm here for. I should be doing this. I can do this. I've done it before, etc. So when you have those light bulb moments, and it might take a bit to like really realize that it is a light bulb moment, but when you have that, just take a second and like realize it's a pivotal moment for you to understand that you might be dealing with an issue of delegating, not because you have control or that you want to have control over it, is that you're just so used to the way you've been doing things. And now you need to change a little bit to be more mindful of where your time and energy is going. Does that make
And
sense?
it's, yeah, and it's so funny because, especially on the real estate, you're right, like the business transactions, we need to be in those and working on them.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not something that Dawn can do, right? So that requires the legal work. Um, Real estate transactions, it's funny because before we had Dawn, was doing everything from start to finish myself. So, and this could go for like any type of task that you have to deal with at work. Like if you are used to doing it yourself, it can be difficult to transition from having your hands on every aspect of whatever you're doing to passing some of that stuff off to somebody else. So to
Right.
try and figure out like what I could give her, and what I needed to keep for myself, it was hard at first. And we're still trying to come up with a system that I like. We don't have something that I'm in love with yet. We were actually just talking about it this morning, but we're working together to try to figure out like what the best combination is to get from start to finish. Like obviously in the beginning, I'm the one negotiating the contract and I'm doing all the back and forth at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But then once the contract is signed, I really pass it off to Dawn. Like unless there's an issue that I have to deal with, she will handle like all the day-to-day tasks that are required on these transactions up until we get to the time of closing. And I like to think about it like if I didn't have her doing that, I wouldn't be able to get the things done that I need to get done. Because she communicates with the clients, like she, keeps them updated. She talks to everybody. So I don't know that I'd be able to. I was okay at it before, but I don't know if I would able to do it at that level if I didn't delegate it to her.
Right.
Um, but it can be hard to figure out like what to let go of and what to keep for yourself. Do you find that?
Absolutely.
I know you find that.
Absolutely. I no, I absolutely find that. And I from the experience that I came from, this is like the old adage of like know thyself. Well, I know myself to be one of those people that just said yes a lot to helping and assisting in every way that I possibly can, especially when it comes to the legal career, because I started in a position that I was support staff to a team. I was doing the things that were being asked of me to do. I didn't start out in a law office as an attorney. I started at as a legal intern, like a law clerk almost.
Yeah.
And so I was doing a lot of the things that now I've been doing it for gosh, 14 years. And that's a really long time to like undo those grooves of what you're used to doing. Um, but as a
Right. Like
business,
when you started with us, I mean, you were like doing the mail, you were doing,
doing it all,
all that
filing
stuff, filing,
letters.
all that stuff. So
Yep.
to now be in a completely different role and to have to pass that off to somebody else, like that's got to be hard when you like,
Yeah,
you probably just say to yourself, like, oh my God, I could just do this myself because you
totally.
did,
Yeah.
right?
And 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 I still will do it. If somebody else isn't doing it for me, I still have to do it. I know it's ultimately my responsibility, but it's untraining yourself and unraveling years and years and years of doing it on your own and doing it the way that you like it to be done. All of those things, it's unraveling all of that and saying, okay, I have really competent team members that I can hand this off to. Or I shouldn't be, dealing with this administrative issue. I have an incredible accounts manager or an accountant that I can rely upon. I don't need to sit here and wrangle with this. I can ask a question. I can send an email. I can see if somebody can fit it in to what they're doing for the day. Um, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of like realization. Like that's where the pitfall is, or I guess the challenges that you're facing, and then saying, okay, how can I do this in baby steps? How can I start to release that control a little bit more? And it's not control in a bad way either, though. I,
It
I
can
don't
be
want it to,
though.
it
It
can
can
be.
be because
Eh,
it can hold you back from being more productive, if that makes
Right.
any sense. Because if you're
Yeah.
spending your time doing like administrative stuff that can be done by Dawn, and we all know that there's a lot of things she does a lot better than me. So I will happily hand this stuff off to her and
Yep.
say, go. Like she is amazing at figuring out the technology issues, like calling the courts, having conversations with people, filing things. Like
Hmm.
she just does it better.
I
And
know.
that's fine. And I feel like that is also a realization that sometimes can be hard to come to um and let go, is that like I'm not the best at everything. Like I can do the legal work and that's my thing, but like she just does certain things better.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't I have her doing them, right?
Yeah. And we've talked about this before too on previous episodes, but obviously the context of when we're having these conversations has changed for us
Yeah.
drastically since the
Yeah.
last time we talked about delegating. And more factors and more circumstances have come to light. We're expanding our physical location, we're expanding our team. We are really in a push and growth period that is requiring us to push and grow ourselves. And so as I mean, just to get like a little higher level here, as humans, we want the path of least resistance. So when you start banging up against resistance constantly, of saying like, I don't know where all of my time is going, or I feel like I'm spending too much time on this and not enough time on that. It's that uncomfortability that makes you turn in and inward and realize like, okay, something's got to give. I have to change something and just try something else. You could try and fail. Like you could try and it's not really failing, but you can learn from it and figure out maybe that's not the tweak. Maybe that's not the direction I need to go in. Maybe I don't need to hire a new associate, but I need more paralegal staff to help with X, Y, or Z. So it's being curious, it's asking those right questions, like we always come back to. But it's also just making the realization and like looking inward and saying, where could it start with me as opposed to where it could start with other people? Where could I be doing better with something as the leader of the firm, as opposed to always looking outward of me and seeing where other people could be doing other things?
And I think a good way to do that is to look at where you're spending your time. And I was just telling Amy before, she's laughing at me. I had Dawn create a new planner for me, which I'm now going to share with Amy. Um, it's, I love the time blocking that we've used from Chic Influencer. So I literally just had Dawn like go in Excel. Because I mean, that tracker that I've been using is great for general purposes, but there are certain things, for our business that obviously are not going to be on there.
Right.
So I included certain line items like new closings and other things that, I want to track for every single day so that I can see, what I'm doing every day. How many transactions I'm bringing in, how many hours I'm billing, all these different things that are important for me to know, to see, where I'm spending my time and to decide if there's any changes I need to make. If I'm spending time one place where I really should be spending it somewhere else. And that folds into the conversation of delegation also, because if
Mhm.
I'm spending time on something that I really should be giving to Dawn, then, I'll be able to see that. So I had her create this new Excel spreadsheet for me this week. And it was actually pretty eye opening to look and see at the bottom, all the categories I included on the bottom,
Right.
and my numbers for every day. And I was like, wow. And it's eye opening, and it makes me see how different my role is now, because Amy and I are now the leaders. Like we are now the ones bringing in the work, handing out the work. Whereas before we were just like the workhorse. We were given the work. Here you go. This is what the case is about. Go. And we did the work,
Yeah.
and that was it. So now it's been interesting this week to see on that spreadsheet, like where I'm spending my time, and what I've been doing. And so now I can start to see like some changes that I need to make. Um, but if I didn't do that, I would never know. I would just keep going on the same hamster wheel. So I think it's important to look at, what you're doing. If you want to use even if you just whip out a piece of paper and start
Mhm.
keeping track of your days and create, I think we've talked about this before, two columns. One on the left is things only you can do, and
Yep.
on the right, things you can give to somebody else.
Yep.
And I might be doing that again.
Yeah. I loved what you just said though too, where you were like, it makes you reevaluate where your role is. And that now in the context of this entire conversation is way too broad of a question. So if you're sitting here wrangling with the question like Laura was of like, what is my role? What am I supposed to be doing every day? Start boiling that down. We talked about this once before with oh gosh, who was it? Dean Graziosi, who talks about, your 7 layers of
Yes.
questions to go 7 layers deep. Start asking smaller questions to figure out smaller action steps that are more actionable for you. Don't keep focusing on those big, big questions when there's a littler one that you could answer that could actually produce some movement and some change that you're like, okay, so that worked. All right, good. And then, because then ultimately, all of these little questions that you ask and all of the little answers that you get are going to create the big sum of that big question that you were asking.
Yeah.
So I would say be patient with yourself, give yourself the grace. You're allowed to feel overwhelmed. You're allowed to feel a little lost. You're allowed to feel like you don't know which way is up on certain days, because we certainly know that. But if you do confront those big questions and you have them just sitting right in front of you, try to boil it down to something else and say, let me just take a look at what I did yesterday. Tracking is a great way to do this, but like, let me just see where I was struggling yesterday. Let's take that as an example. It doesn't have to be consistent. Your days don't have to look the same, but see if maybe you can come up with an answer to that question by just looking at one day or 1 hour or one portion of your day.
I love that. And even if you're talking about, making like the list of like things that you only you can do and things that, you could delegate to somebody else, even if it's a little bit too overwhelming to do like one big brain dump, take yesterday. What did you
That's
do yesterday?
it.
Like,
Mhm.
one on the left side of the page, what are the things that you did yesterday that only you can do? For me, I was at a closing. Nobody else can do that for me unless we hired another attorney to do that. So that has to be me.
Right.
But there were many other items on the list yesterday that Dawn was taking care of, right? Because those are
Yeah.
not things that I have to do. And believe me, she yesterday was so it was just complete insanity. And she did so much
Yeah.
yesterday, but all
Yep.
things that she was able to handle without me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so even if you take like yesterday and do that and just look at like what you have to do and what you could give to somebody else, and even just look at how you spent your time yesterday, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that could be helpful too.
Just take a look at it. And if you don't have any time written down, we recommend you should. So, try to recreate the day. Even if it's tomorrow morning over a nice hot cup of coffee or a hot cup of tea, take a look at your Friday, see what your Friday looks like, see what it is that you had accomplished and what are things that you wished you had accomplished and where's the gap? What could you do to try and bridge the gap between those two?
Yeah, and a big part of that might be figuring out like what you can have somebody else do for you. And how, and it doesn't have to be in your business, by the way. Like it could
Right.
be at home too. Like obviously, everybody knows Amy and I, both have kids, we both have a household to run. And there's a million things that need to be done in the house. So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I'm not a business owner, this doesn't really apply to me, it does apply to you because you could look at your personal life and do the same exact analysis, right?
Yeah, because it
Um,
makes up your entire life, as we always
Yep.
say. So outside things, outside of the four walls of our office, they all affect us as well. And so you have to take a look at it big picture. We're not trying to make you do that exercise though. Start small, start where you feel like the most pain, and start unraveling those situations one by one. But yeah, really great point. It could be outside of where you're working from 9 to 5, and it could be something going on at home or in delegation between spouses,
Yep.
whoever it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
So
love
we know
that.
that there are a lot of people, women, moms, especially that struggle with this issue. So we hope that these tips were helpful for you today. We thank you for spending time with us and we'll talk to you on the next episode.